All right, so it's 4 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and start. This session is called Encouragement, Empowerment, and Excellence, Behavior Strategies That Work. My name is Andrea Hayter. People just call me Hayter sometimes, so you can call me that. If your last name is Hayter, you have to own it. There's my contact information if you want to contact me after the session. Feel free to drop any questions that you have in the chat or insights. I'll be doing questions at the end of this presentation. So we can get started. So teaching is one of the most difficult jobs in America, and student behavior for many is often one of the most difficult parts of the job. In this session, I'm going to give you some strategies that can enhance the classroom management that you already have in place, because you can know your content inside and out, you can be an expert at it, but it doesn't matter if that content can't be delivered. I'm not here to give you a program. You're not going to have to come back to your school on Monday and make new displays or any of that. And I'm also not going to sit here and pretend like I have all the answers to all things classroom management. It's a very complex topic, and not everything works for everybody. There's no real one-size-fits-all answer. What I will be giving you is research-based strategies that you can use for low-level behaviors so that you can prevent them from becoming more serious problems. So a lot of our extreme problems originate from those low-level behaviors. I normally present these in a full-day staff training, but my hope for you in this time that I have is that you come away with this with some practical tools that you can just add to your toolbox and you can implement them immediately. You can also adapt these to fit your needs. Before I get into the strategies, I'd like to go into some core beliefs that we have. These are the underlying beliefs behind the strategies. So if you can buy into these beliefs, if you're on board with them, then I think the strategies are going to work really well for you. It's like the mindset that we have for them. So our first core belief is caring is key. Madeline Hunter, one of the great gurus of education, said it first when she said, "Kids don't care how much you know until they know how much you care." And I think that rings true today, because if a kid thinks for 1 second that you don't care about them, then you've already lost. It's all about building relationships. Now, this building relationships term is like pretty trendy right now. You've probably heard it a lot lately, and for good reason. You also might be frustrated with it. Maybe you've been told to build relationships with your students, but you haven't been given any concrete steps as to how to do that. Or you've been told that building relationships is the only thing that you need for classroom management, which isn't true. Building relationships is important. Connecting with students is important, but it's not a cure-all. So I want you to think of this as like the foundation for the strategies. We need to connect with our students. We know that students who connect with their teachers, who think that their teachers care about them, and who think that their teachers like them, those students will work harder and they'll behave better. And that's why we're here. I want to show you some different styles of teaching. We have our authoritarian style. This is the hammer. This is the gavel. This teacher is rigid and unyielding. Their interactions with students are mostly in the form of commands and instructions. Students don't have a voice in this classroom. Now, there are times where you as the teacher will need to put your foot down. You can sometimes use this style at times. But if we use this style all the time, if someone's putting the hammer on you day after day, the natural human response to that is to resist. So when this style is used exclusively, it can lead to resistance, and over time, it can lead to rebellion. On the other side of the spectrum, we have our permissive teachers. So like if you stick your head in this classroom and you look around, you can't really tell who's in charge. They let things go, they let things slide, they might be kind of wishy-washy. Now, just like with before, it's fine to borrow from this style. There may be times where the most appropriate action is just to look the other way. But if you use this style all the time exclusively, it's going to lead to disrespect, and then it's eventually going to end up in chaos. So what we want is an approach that's kind of in between these two styles. And this is authoritative. So not authoritarian, authoritative. This teacher is clearly the leader in the classroom. Students also have a voice though, and they're engaged. There's respect going on in this classroom. Student to teacher, teacher to student, and student to student. This kind of teacher gives students a choice and then honors that choice, especially when it comes to discipline. Another one of our core beliefs that I'd like to show you is about conflict. Conflict is an essential part of growing up. It's inevitable. Students will challenge you like it's their job, and they do too good of a job of it sometimes. And while this can be frustrating to take on as a teacher, know this: when a student challenges authority, it's actually a sign of healthy intellectual and social development. Kids are hardwired to look for weaknesses, loopholes, and gray areas. And that's because they're trying to figure out the world around them. And so while we know this, conflict is guaranteed, conflict is inevitable, but at the same time, combat is optional. And shortly, I'll be showing you some different techniques that you can respond to conflict without turning it into full-on combat. Another core belief that is behind these strategies is that behavior can be changed. So you might agree with me that we have an entire generation coming to us unsocialized and with inappropriate behavior. But at the same time, they weren't born that way. These students weren't coming out of the womb with inappropriate behavior. And that's because the majority of behavior is learned. And so knowing that, we have the opportunity to guide and teach them appropriate behavior. One of the most challenged assumptions that we have in education is that students are coming to us willing and able to learn. So here's the new approach. Any student that comes through your door, you are the one that is going to have to teach them everything they need to know. It doesn't happen without you. They need to learn from you everything they need to be successful in your classroom. Which leads me to our last core belief for today. Good behavior must be systematically taught. We systematically teach our content. You have all these great techniques to introduce a topic. You might have some discussion about it. You might have some guided practice, maybe some independent practice. You assess. Based on those assessments, then you will reteach as needed, maybe scaffold, maybe accommodate. But there's a system, there's a way that you're teaching your content. But we don't always take the same approach with behavior. A lot of times we will, first week of school, come up with some rules. Maybe you make a social contract with your class. Neither of those things have anything bad about them. But the problem is we have our rules, we have our social contract, but we're not thorough enough to know that the students really understand the expectations. You put the rules on the wall, you post your social contract on the wall, and a lot of times people won't even go back to it until there's a misbehavior. But what we need to do, if we are the ones that have to teach behavior, we can systematically teach it. We can teach the behaviors we want, we can practice them, we can assess, and then we can reteach as needed and review throughout the year. So knowing all these beliefs, let's get into some application. I'd like to start out with self-control. Self-control takes a great deal of practice, and I wish our students had more self-control. But the kicker is, in this session, I'm not here to talk about them. I'm here to talk about us. We need more self-control in the classroom, because when, not if, conflict happens, who is the person in the room who is going to keep things from escalating? It's the teacher. It's the adult in the room. We know that conflict is inevitable, but when we react in anger or other emotional outbursts to conflict, it undermines our authority. It also shows 30 students how to set you off and how to stop instruction. And at the same time, if you're ignoring a problem, if you're going into that permissive style, ignoring it won't make it go away. And it's also going to show 30 students that you'll back down in the face of a challenge. So what are we supposed to do? For any of the strategies I'm going to show you today, the first thing I want you to remember is that we're going to remain calm. You know, easier said than done. But this is very powerful because calm is contagious. Consider emergency response personnel like firefighters, EMTs, hostage negotiators. People in these positions are specifically trained to be calm in a crisis. And because they're calm, that helps us feel safe. And the same thing applies to the classroom. Let's take a classroom situation. Let's say you're giving out an assignment and you pass it out, you give it to one student and they go, well, this is stupid, I'm not doing it. What I really want to do to react to that is to get into a debate. I want to tell the student, no, it's not stupid. This is important. Let me tell you why it's important. But that's just opening myself up to escalation. That is going to stop instruction. It's very entertaining to the rest of the class. And the student who doesn't want to do this assignment is going to try to save face. So it's a whole minefield when you get into this debate, when you take the debate bait. So instead of getting into this, one thing that I would suggest, this is stupid, I'm not doing it. Maybe we could form the supportive stance. This is body language that is recommended by crisis abatement experts. So this is what it looks like. You're going to give the student personal space. This is about 1.5 to 3 feet of space. And for me, I did a lot with elementary, and that seems like a really big distance. I was always told, get close to the kids for classroom management. Proximity is everything. But the problem is there are students who get uncomfortable if you're too close to them, if we are in their personal space. I get uncomfortable if someone's in my personal space. I've got a pretty big bubble about me. When I lived in the Netherlands, I went to this church, and there was a lady there who always wanted to talk to me like this close to me. And it just made my skin crawl. And at the time, I wasn't really confident enough in my Dutch to ask her to back up or to just ask her for some space. So everyone in the church watched me every week back myself up into walls. Sometimes I'd be in a corner just because I was so uncomfortable because she was too close to me, and I was an adult. And for our children who are uncomfortable because you're in their bubble, a lot of times they will just totally shut down cognitively. All they can think of is, you're in my space, you have coffee breath, get away from me right now. So we want to honor that space. And unfortunately, for one reason or another, we may have students who are actively threatened if an adult is too close to them. And we don't want to add that agitation to an already tense situation. So 1.5 to 3 feet. You're not going to stand straight onto them, but you are going to stand at a slight angle, about 45 degrees. And that's going to show the student, like, I am here. You're still kind of facing them, but it's less confrontational, but it's still a pretty stable angle to be at. You're going to look down. There's no staring contest, no stink eye. Look down and model cognition. When I say model cognition, that means you're going to look like you're thinking. So when I say that, you could have a hand on your chin. If you're like me and you get shaky hands when things go awry, you could clasp your hands in front of you or behind you. Just something that shows, like, I am quiet, I am here, I am stable, I am also thinking. And the most important thing in the supportive stance is to zip it up. And that's because silence is powerful. So my dad doesn't really talk that much. And when he was growing up at the dinner table, all conversation would stop when he talked, because his parents and siblings figured if he had something to say, it must be really important. So fast forward, my parents are trying to buy a car, and they're at the dealership. They're at the phase where they're sitting across from the dealer, and the dealer's negotiating the price with them. So the dealer makes his first offer, and my dad didn't respond. He just stared at the guy, didn't say anything. This made the dealer really uncomfortable. So in turn, he made a lower offer on the car, and my dad continued to sit there and stare at him. Didn't say a word, which just terrified the dealer. So eventually my parents walked out of there with a terrific deal. And my mom turned to my dad and she said, "What were you doing in there? Why didn't you say anything? You were scaring that guy." And my dad said, "I was thinking." Silence is one of the most underutilized and powerful tools that we have available to us as educators. And in this case, when you're in the supportive stance in response to conflict, this has two purposes. One, you're going to give the student time to self-correct. If you make that supportive stance and you're there for maybe 6 to 9 seconds, there's a chance that the student will do what they're supposed to do. So back to our friend who goes, "This is stupid, I'm not doing it." In that supportive stance, with quiet and enough time, there's a chance that they might say, "Fine, I'll do it. I still think it's stupid." You will need to address the disrespect later. We're not ignoring that. You don't always have to pounce on something right when it happens, though. In this moment, the student is going to do the assignment, and you've just avoided stopping class. You've avoided a confrontation. You've avoided an escalation. So in my book, that's a win. Sometimes they won't self-correct, though. You wait 6 to 9 seconds, you get to second number 10, we still have a problem. This silent period will allow you time to think about what you're going to say next. So I want you to think about this. Is what I'm about to say clear, concise, enforceable, logical, and proportional? So what I mean by that, is it clear? You guys are great at this already. Are the words that are coming out of my mouth understandable to the student? Is it concise? Is it short and to the point? Is it enforceable? Can I, in my position on this campus, carry any consequence I'm about to say out? Is it logical? Does it fit with the nature of the misbehavior? And is it proportional? Is it to the same level? Is it to the same degree as the behavior at hand? For example, if a student shouts out one time in class and you take away recess for the rest of the year, that's not quite proportional to the behavior that is being exhibited. So think clear, concise, enforceable, logical, and proportional. And that's going to keep you from having to backtrack on yourself. It's going to keep you from undermining yourself inadvertently because you said something impulsively. Let's talk a little bit about button pushing. Kids love to press buttons. They're going to do that. It's just part of their wiring. It's part of the growth process. And we all have buttons. It just kind of depends on what the button is. One of my personal buttons as a teacher is if somebody says something is boring, because I mean, how dare they? I worked all weekend on this lesson and you're back here saying it's boring. Now, what I want to do, like my not regulated, unself-controlled person, my response that I want to say, I'm already getting worked up because I'm thinking about a lesson being boring. My response to that, my knee-jerk reaction is to go, you're boring, but that's going to escalate things. It's going to open myself up to all kinds of abuse, and there's a better way. So let's say I'm teaching, we're doing our thing, and I hear a voice in the back saying I'm boring. I'm going to use a diffuser phrase instead. A diffuser phrase is a powerful way to reduce the tension in the room, release some of the pressure in the room. So I'm teaching, someone says, this is boring. I'm going to say, nevertheless, and I'm going to keep going. Other people's buttons might be past history. You might have someone say like, Mr. Jernigan didn't make us do this last year. Now, one option is to say, do I look like Mr. Jernigan? But I don't want to hear the answer to that question. So instead, Mr. Jernigan didn't do it like this last year. I can say, probably so, and I continue. These diffuser phrases, when you say them with a neutral, matter-of-fact tone, volume, and cadence, are going to communicate two things to the student. One is, I hear you, and two, so what? You're acknowledging the student, but you're also telling them the instruction is paramount. I'm not stopping because of you right now. So I showed you two of them already. You can say nevertheless, you can say probably so. Other ones, I understand, I'm sorry. So neutral tone, volume, and cadence, nevertheless, probably so, I understand, I'm sorry. You can use these phrases in response to all kinds of things, but I just suggest that you don't go too much on autopilot with them. For example, if you're teaching a lesson and someone says, oh, this is so hard, I'm so stupid, then don't say probably so, pick something else. So these are our phrases that you can use. Later, I'll show you my email address. You can send me an email and I'll send you a PDF of like 60 more of these that you can use in the classroom. So we have our diffuser phrases. We can also talk about our timing. Good discipline is all about good timing. We have push asides, we have walkaways. Here's the difference. A push aside, you're going to deal with the issue later. Like our this stupid, I'm not doing it kid. We could diffuse that, we could supportive stance that, but we're going to address it at a later time. We're not stopping instruction. A walk away, though, you're choosing not to deal with it at all. So here's some situations that are the difference. You're teaching and a student says, this is hard, I don't like this. I'm going to diffuse it. I'll say, I'm sorry, I'm going to keep going. But I don't really need to go back and talk to the student about that comment. They might have just not thought about what they were going to say. There are things that are hard for me. There are things that I don't like, but I'm not really getting disrespect from that. So I'm just going to let it go. You can diffuse and walk away. But maybe I'm teaching and someone says, you're so boring. I can say, I'm sorry, I can keep teaching, but I still need to address it. We're not ignoring the disrespect. So there's different ways you can do it. It kind of depends on your situation. You diffuse, you keep teaching, and then you want to address it with the student, if possible, at a time that's inconvenient for them. So this can mean different things. This could be maybe a couple minutes out of recess. Don't take their whole recess, just hold them for a couple minutes. If you're secondary, it could be maybe part of the passing period if you're able to. But you're sending the kids to recess, you're dismissing your class, see you later, see you later, see you later. Hey, I need to talk to you 1 second. About what? oh, I want to talk to you about that boring thing that I just said, that you said earlier. And they might say, but no, I don't have time to talk about it. I have to go to recess, or it's my passing period. And you can diffuse, I understand, but stand right here. We're going to work this out. That is so much less reinforcing than debating in the middle of class. It's going to inconvenience the student. It's much less likely that they're going to exhibit that behavior again. It's not going to reward them for that. So we can use our push-asides, we can use our walkaways. When I do this in the full day trainings, we talk about a way to intervene and do some consequences for behaviors. It's called refocus. It's got a lot of details in it, and I can't really quite give it justice in this time, but I am going to talk to you about how you make decisions on if you need to take on a behavior. You make thousands of decisions a day. The only two professions that really rival the amount of decisions that a teacher has to make in a day are surgeons and air traffic controllers. And so you've got to make decisions about how you're teaching your content. You also have to make decisions about how you're going to handle behavior. You have to decide, do I need to take this behavior on or not? Am I going to make this a push aside? Is this going to be a walk away? Do I need to intervene right now? There's all kinds of decisions to make. And it's a lot. So I want to give you a guide on how you can decide if you need to intervene on an emergent behavior in class. These are called our classroom integrity questions. You're going to ask yourself, can I still teach? Can the class still learn? And can the student with the emergent behavior, can the student still learn? So a couple situations, let's say I have a student who is hypermobile and they can't tolerate sitting at a desk for long periods of time. So to accommodate that, they stand in the back of the room. They're still doing all the work. They're just not in their desk. I can still teach. So can I still teach? The answer is yes. Can the class still learn? If the student is on task, they're not bothering anybody, they're not in anyone's way. Yeah, the answer is yes, the class can still learn. And can that student still learn? Yes, even though it doesn't look like the picture perfect classroom, they're not in their seat, they can still learn. If I get a yes to all three of those questions, learning is happening in my room, my classroom is intact, I'm going to keep going. Sometimes our authoritarian teachers will get a yes to all these questions, but they'll still stop themselves just because things don't look like quite right to them. But if it's yes, keep going, baby, you're good. But maybe we're doing something else. Maybe there's independent practice going on and you have a kid out of their seat, but they're going around and getting other kids off task. Can I still teach? Maybe. I'm pretty good at tuning things out. But can the class still learn? No, because they're being pulled off task. Can the students still learn? No, they're getting people off task, which means that they're not on task themselves. So if I have a no to any one of these questions, that's when I know I need to give the student a prompt. I need to do something to intervene on this situation so that my classroom integrity doesn't suffer. So that's something you can do just to kind of help you in the vast amount of decisions that you have to make day after day, minute after minute. So I just showed you some different ways to have some self-control and also make decisions. These are more like responsive strategies to behaviors. I want to go over some proactive things you can do as well, that you can do even now in February. One of them is teach twos. This is related to our belief that behavior can be systematically taught. This is teaching our routines and procedures and doing it in a systematic way so that it's thorough and students really know what to do and they know what's expected of them. These were developed originally by Madeline Hunter, whose quote I shared with you earlier, and also John Wooden. If you don't know who he is, he's a very successful basketball coach of UCLA, and he was really famous for teaching his players every single little detail that they needed to know, all the way down to how to put their socks on their feet. He left nothing to chance and extremely successful. They got together, Madeline Hunter, John Wooden, they showed pre-service teachers how to do this, how to teach your routines, how to teach your procedures. These are good if you front load them at the beginning of the year. If your admin is okay with it, some teachers will spend like a month just teaching behavior, just on these teach twos before they get to content. And then it kind of seems like, oh, I'm behind on my content. But if your behavior's in place, you're going to save a lot of time on your content later. But it's February. There's nothing stopping you from doing teach twos now. You can treat it like a reset. Maybe you have a class and you have a routine that's kind of fallen off the rails, you could present it as something like, I've noticed that we're losing some time because of this thing. I respect you too much to waste your time. So I want to try this with you so that we can get back on track. So you can totally do this now. And then the other thing about Teach Twos is you want to keep reviewing your expectations, revisit them on Mondays, maybe after holidays, especially. So that's the idea behind them. I'm going to take an example. Let's say you have a problem with your class calling out a lot. They're not raising their hand. The process for teaching this procedure is first to include student voice. For this kind of stuff, you need the students to buy into it. And to help promote buy-in, then you want to have the students contribute to it. And you also need the rationale. So ask the students, why do we raise our hand? And they can probably tell you, maybe it's so you know who has a question, or it could be so that we can all hear each other. We don't all talk at once. So you want that student voice, you want the rationale. The students are going to help you come up with the criteria. This is going to help make it their own. And you can get really detailed with this. So you want to talk about what is the perfect way to raise your hand. Your arm is straight up, you're not waving your arm around, your feet are still, your eyes are on the speaker, your voice is off, all of these things, you have them demonstrate that perfect. But you also want to determine what is an imperfect way to do this procedure. An imperfect way of raising your hand, maybe waving it around, maybe you're out of your seat, maybe you're screaming at the teacher for attention. You are going to demonstrate the imperfect for the students, but I advise you just to have the students only demonstrate the perfect version of it. And that's because practice makes permanent. So they're only doing the perfect, but you are going to determine what's imperfect. You as the teacher can demonstrate that for them. You also want to get into the gray area. I mentioned earlier, students are really hardwired to look for those gray areas. Those gray areas, those in between, not quite perfect behaviors, that's what kind of gets you on the slope towards the more serious problems. So you want almost, but not quite. So maybe your arm is straight, but you're wiggling your fingers. They're not shouting out, but you're maybe muttering under your breath. So the teacher can also demonstrate these almost, but not quite. So you're going to get down to the wire. And that way you want it to be so clear that misbehavior then becomes a choice and not a I didn't know situation. Teach Twos can also be done building wide. You can agree as a staff, how do we walk in the hallway? What's our cafeteria behavior? How do we behave in assemblies? Anything that you want the students to do for you can be a Teach Two. And you can do it now. You can start it now if you approach it by giving students a voice in it, and also with the rationale as well, and defining the perfect, the imperfect, and the almost but not quite. So that's our Teach Twos. That's a proactive strategy you can use. And I also want to wrap it up by touching on another proactive strategy, and that is unconditional positive regard. So I mentioned earlier, we need to build relationships with our students. We need to build connections with them. This is not to be confused with unconditional love, like what you might have for your personal children. But if you have unconditional positive regard for your students, you are communicating, I like you just because you're in my class and that you're a human being. And these can be done by different kinds of interactions. We have contingent interactions and we have non-contingent interactions. So the difference is a contingent interaction is conditional. It's based on something that is done by the student. A non-contingent interaction is unconditional. The student doesn't have to do anything to warrant that kind of interaction from you. Let's look at some examples. So contingent interaction, thanks for turning in your assignment. Look over chapter 4 for tomorrow. You worked really hard on that essay. There's nothing wrong with these, but each of these, the student has to do something. They have to turn in their assignment. Maybe they ask you, what chapter do we need to look at? Or they turn in a really good essay. There's nothing wrong with these, but think about your students. You might have students who don't do anything for you, and so they may not get any of these contingent interactions. If that's the only way you interact with students, then you may not interact with some of these non-performing students at all. These are the ones that need the most relationships. So let's look at non-contingent. How's your day going? Do you have a game this week? How do you like your other classes? They don't have to do anything to get this kind of interaction from you. These are going to take more time. Like if you say, thanks for turning in your assignment, that's it. The student could say, you're welcome. And that's the end of the interaction. But if you say, how's your day going? That could lead into a longer conversation, or asking about the game, asking about other classes. You're going to have a response from the student. It's going to take more time. But as we know, if a student is connected to their teacher, they're going to work harder and behave better. So I recommend you invest the time in these non-contingent interactions, because that's going to help them to have better behavior, and that's going to save you time during instruction later on. It's the difference between teaching a student that they are a human being versus a human doing. We're not human doings, we're human beings. So we want to teach our students that they are that they have value as just being a human. Building rapport is really important. That'll lead to trust. So here's some other things you can do. Having a sense of humor, being able to laugh at yourself is great. That's a kind of a way to diffuse things as well. Encouraging discussions, knowing their interests, being available to help them if they need it. I don't need to tell y'all this. You guys are the best at this. Knowing their names and knowing how to pronounce their names is huge. Sharing your personal experiences. If you're getting to know them, let them get to know you as well. And also relating course material to real life is a great way to also build that rapport. So that's a great way to make some positive connections. Kids need positive connections with adults. A lot of kids don't have enough positive connections with adults, and this can help to build that. So just to wrap up, here's some key takeaways from this session that I'd like you to remember. When you have conflict, which it will happen, calm is contagious and silence is powerful. You can assume the supportive stance. You can model cognition. You can use our diffuser phrases like nevertheless, probably so, I understand, I'm sorry. You can use your timing. Something could be a push aside. You deal with the problem later, or it's a walk away. You can diffuse it, but just let it go. You can ask your classroom integrity questions. Can I teach? Can the student still learn? Can the student with the behavior still learn? Our teach tos are how you can teach your behaviors so that the students know what to expect and know what you expect. And you can build relationships by using non-contingent interactions in addition to your contingent interactions. So I want to just leave you my contact information as well. I do these in full day staff training. So if you're interested in learning more, you can go to my website, andreahayter.com. You can call me, you can text me, you can send me an email. And just a reminder, if you send me an email, just, hey, I was at your session, I will respond with a PDF of additional diffuser phrases that you can use in the classroom. So thank you very much. I'm going to go into the chat. I've been seeing the messages come up. And let's take a look at any questions we might have. And if you have any questions, you can just jump in, because I'm not really seeing. Let me scroll through. I don't want to miss any questions. The copy of the presentation is in the course description, the session description. I put it as a Google Drive link in there. Does anybody have any questions? You can turn on your microphone and ask me anything. I will try to help. Or you can drop it in the chat. Okay, there's the link to the slides that you can use. Okay, well, I guess if there's no questions, if you think of a question later, feel free to contact me. I love questions. I love working with people and trying to think about how we could solve any problems they have. So keep this contact information in mind. I hope you guys had a great conference today, and I will maybe hear from you or see you around. Thank you so much. Thanks for coming.
Hey, Andrea.
Yes.
I really appreciate, I had CHAMPS training last summer.
Okay.
Because the year before was just really rough after COVID and everything.
Yeah.
But this kind of gives you I love the diffuser phrases, because it just like gives you something to say. Yeah. Without escalating the situation. So that was very helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, you can use it for all kinds of stuff.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. All right, guys. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close the session if there are no more questions. And I hope you have a great rest of your day. Bye.